think fertility patients need support.
It's a lonely journey.
It's very lonely. It's very isolating. I just want to use this kind of quote is, if we do not have connection to something, to someone, there's no movement. There can't be movement if there's no connection. And if there's no connection, we're stuck. So you sit with the same thing going on the whole time. Okay. It can be stressful. The statistics on this varies a little bit. If you look at people who are in infertility treatment for a longer period of time, they seem to suffer more from depression, from anxiety. The latest research I could find was between 20 and 60 patients who are at least at the second or third IVF treatment tends to have enough symptoms to be diagnosed with depression. So this is important to keep in mind because you have to look after yourself now. You have to make sure that you do not become one of the statistics there. Okay. Those of you in treatment, you would know that treatment tends to affect all areas of your life. Okay. It affects what you eat, what you drink. It depends how you exercise. It depends if you can go on holiday. Are you cycling at this point? Can you plan for a holiday? Do you have to be at home? It kind of determines if you're willing to go to a friend's stalk tea. It impacts on your relationships. It impacts on family. It impacts on your closest relationships with a partner. So there's literally no area of your life that kind of is separate from fertility treatment. For a lot of clients that I see, even their spiritual lives gets quite impacted on. I don't know if that's the experience of anyone in the room. Okay. And finances, of course. That's a big one. I'm going to go back. Okay. I think the one thing that stands out for me in terms of the infertility journey is the ups and downs. It's up and down. You have hope something good is going to happen. IVF doesn't work, cycle doesn't work, and you're down in the dumps again. And I think that's particularly difficult and quite strenuous for a lot of people. And as I listen to clients, I hear that the longer they get into the treatment, the less they disclose to other people. You tell people about your first IVF. You chat to the family, you chat to a lot of people who are willing to listen. The fourth one, you don't tell people anymore. Okay. So it becomes harder. I think there's also a lot of other things like grief, low self-esteem, loss. There's a lot of going on for wherever you are in the journey. We spoke about the isolation. The other thing that often comes up in sessions and in groups is that the amount of decision making you have to make. There's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind the whole time. For some people it's about where do we stop? Where's the end to this journey for us? Do we stop after one IVF? Do we stop after 3 IUIs? So that's also something that's difficult to deal with. We spoke about the tribe. I think we forget, when we look at Maslow, how basic the need of belonging is. The need to belong to something is kind of just up from basic safety and comfort. So we're trying to work on self-actualization here, but our needs are oftentimes right at the bottom here. Okay. And sometimes it's just hearing a different perspective. Because you get so stuck in your own experience, it's really hard to kind of take yourself out of it for a moment. I like this quote. It says, infertility and its treatment are severe, chronic, low control stressors. And because it's a low control stressor, everything that you can do to empower yourself, anything that you can do to take charge of, whether it's eating right, whether it's joining a support group, anything like that, helps you not to feel vulnerable on this whole journey and not to feel as helpless. Okay. I think when you look at joining a support group, there are a few things that are important. Not everyone is comfortable in a group. I think in that sense, virtual support groups are easier because there's an amount of anonymity, you don't have to disclose as much. But the being brave is part, because being on this journey and doing all the treatment, I believe that's a very brave thing to do. It's not an easy journey, so that's part of it. I think the other thing to remember with any kind of support group is you can get overwhelmed because sometimes there's a lot of information. And later on you're just kind of like, I can't anymore, I just want to get off. I don't know how many of you have experienced that in any kind of support setup where you get so saturated with all the information, you keep on being flooded. But it's not just being flooded with information, it's also being flooded with people's stories. And every story that you hear, part of you resonates with, but it tends to become quite blurry after a while. So keep that in mind. And the other thing that I want to mention is that patients involved in fertility treatment have very specific stories. Every person has their own story. Yes, there are things where they overlap, but not everyone is the same. And you come into your treatment and your journey with your history, your coping mechanisms, your things in place that help you support. Okay, so it's that thing of listening to everyone's stories, but everyone's story is not your story. That person's story will not become your story. You have to be very clear on what your boundaries are and what your story is. Okay, I've seen that in the group. You have to kind of keep the group focused in terms of that. Because it's a vulnerable place to be, and it's so easy to take on board someone else's story. It might not be yours, it will not be yours. Okay, I think one thing that I really like doing is allowing a little bit of time before a group and a little bit of time after a group. So that you have a little bit of time just to arrive there and to experience, and a bit of time afterwards to process. I think you do a lot of groups in Cape Town, and I think it's very valuable having something just to debrief after. So keep in mind that that's what you are planning to do. Okay, now this is a lot of information, but some of it we've come to already. The opportunity to join with others. And I think the one thing that is important here for me is the no judgment and the not masking. Because my experience is that fertility patients put up a happy face if anyone asks them, how are you doing? No, I'm doing okay. Someone really asks, you start getting teary and you don't want to speak further, just don't ask. But I think the one place where you don't have to do the masking, the one place where you don't have to pretend that everything is okay, your heart's kind of broken inside. Okay. Reducing stigma. How many of you have experienced people kind of raising an eyebrow at your journey?
All the time.
All the time. Okay. It's either maybe you are too old to have kids, you're a single mom, why do you keep on trying? You've got a child. Incidentally, secondary fertility is just as painful. People have ideas about, from religious perspectives, as to, are you interfering with some kind of natural order? Why don't you just stop? You're putting yourself through this. So there's all these ideas around stigma. Especially donor conception. People don't often have contact with anyone who's conceived by a donor. So that's also something that sometimes gets negative feedback to. And the traditional family is not typical anymore. I don't know how many of you are trying to build a, almost atypical, but a different kind of family, with 2 moms or 2 dads or a single mom. That's definitely a bigger part of the fertility treatment groups that we're finding. Okay. I also came across the word disenfranchised grief many years ago. And disenfranchised grief is any grief where it's not expressed because we believe society won't approve of it. Miscarriage, oftentimes, but it wasn't really a baby yet, so you shouldn't be that sad. Disenfranchised grief actually came up in the 80s when HIV was rife and a lot of people lost their partners. But they weren't allowed to grieve openly because they weren't open and they weren't out. So you can't grieve for someone that you deeply love, but you were never able to declare the relationship. Okay, so keep in mind this is the term. I think the other thing about being in a group is kind of normalizing the experience. You're not the only one feeling this. And I think that's one of the most powerful things in a group, is finding that I'm not completely crazy. I'm not imagining things. This is real. And this is what this person and this person is feeling. And not everything that everyone says in a group will resonate, but a lot of it will resonate for you. You know that feeling when someone says something and you go, exactly. It's that feeling that you get in a group. And there's also the validation of hearing what you're feeling is being validated. No, don't feel like that. It's going to be okay. You will fall pregnant. It's all okay. Someone that says to you, yes, it's really scary thinking that you won't fall pregnant. Okay. And just the relief of being able to say something to someone that you really wouldn't say to anyone else. To say to someone, this sucks. Treatment is hard. The medication makes me feel horrible. Okay, it's being able to say that to someone in a safe space. I think you mentioned the empathy and the compassion. That's a strong experience in the group. There's a woman called Dr. Alice Domar. I don't know if any of you have come across the name. She created the Fertility app. Anyone know of it? It's a really nice app. But she's a professor at Harvard and she runs Boston IVF. And they have done an enormous amount of research on emotional well-being and IVF outcomes. She wrote a book called Conquering Infertility, which is still a really good read. But a lot of her research is about working on the mind-body connection, working on social support, to make sure that you give yourself the best possible opportunity to have a successful cycle. Okay. I think one thing that's nice in the groups is that people give one another a lot of tips. I don't know if it was your experience in the group, but you know what helps for me is if I do this, this, and this. So it's good to have that kind of input from someone who can tell you how it worked for them. It's better than a psychologist telling you, go and do X, Y, and Z. If your peers tell you this works for me, that's probably something that you're going to remember to do. And just the feeling more empowered, listening to people, knowing what you can do, trying to do something to change your situation. Because it's not just about feeling better because of the support you receive in the group. It's about going out and daily life being better. You feel better in general if you're more connected. I think connection is the basis of all relationships. If you look at the psychology literature, connection and attachment is the basis for how our personalities are wired. Okay, I think another nice thing that came up in the groups is how good it was for group members to feel that they helped someone else. That something that you said made someone else do something differently. Something that you said changed something for someone else. And I think as a species, we are actually programmed to help one another rather than do one another harm. So that's a very nice opportunity to do that. I think another thing that came up in our groups at Genesis is just learning about cultural sensitivity, because cultures have different ways of viewing fertility, infertility, treatment. At the risk of oversharing, I became a mom for the first time at 43, and because I'm an older mom, I often get called granny, which now happened 7 times. I'm not counting. So 7 times. And I might start a support group for that. Or granny. But what I often found is if someone says to me, Granny, and I say, no, I'm not Granny, I'm Mom, I've had especially black people come and say to me, that's wonderful, you're so blessed, that's such a blessing. And it makes me think of how we think about children. Okay, and the enthusiasm with which that is always kind of said. I love doing that. Makes up for the 7 times. And I think for couples, the thing that I found at Genesis, usually the couples come together. I think the doctors, they strongly support couples being part of the journey, which does show up because the men come and they talk and they share with one another. We've had in the last group the man who suffers from infertility, and the support that he got from the men was quite beautiful, which was wonderful to see. And sometimes, as much as a couple is in this together, they're not always exactly on the same page. So they come to the group and they start talking, and you can see the one kind of go like, really? Is that what you're feeling? And sometimes just being in a group and having more people there, it makes it easier to have a discussion. It somehow makes it a bit safer to say something. And not everyone is good at finding words for what they feel. I think as a population, we're actually not great at having a good vocabulary for emotion. And sometimes in a group, someone says something in a way that really resonates with you, and suddenly you have the words for what you want to say. And that's a very nice outcome from the groups. Like, you're saying the exact words that I was looking for. Okay. There are many different types. Okay, you get the in-person support groups, and like which we have is one that's location-based. It's at Genesis with a facilitator. It's fairly open-ended, but you also get groups that can be a one-stop. I know Fertility Solutions had a workshop with a support group earlier in the year. It was wonderful, and I think that set a lot of things into motion for us. I think most support groups around here are open, anyone can come, which is very inviting. You get the virtual ones, but then you get different formats. There's a lot out there, there's a lot overseas, so if you really look for something, you will find it. My personal preference is Fertility Solutions. Where to find it? Try to stick to something that was recommended or something that you know is legitimate. I think it's always good to, in a support group, in an in-person support group, to have a professional person there to kind of just facilitate the group. It's important to contain and create a safe space for people. I use this, I hope it's okay. After the support group that happened in February, this is the feedback that came back last week. Wow. Because I think that's the one beautiful thing that comes out of a support group, is getting hope, having someone who can tell you a story that makes you stay motivated, that keeps you in the thing, that keeps the dream alive. Okay. I don't know how many of you are Brené Brown fans of the day. I love her research. She writes a lot on vulnerability, which I think is very relevant for fertility patients because it's a very vulnerable place to be. Okay, so read up, look at her podcast, she's lovely to look at. But a lot of what she writes is about connection. So connection is the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued. When they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. And I think that's the hope we have for every support group that we hold.